had that at Kirtland in 1980, where security police at Manzano complex, which was where the nuclear weapons were stored, saw these strange lights out of Coyote Canyon, which was east of the complex, the nuclear weapons complex, and something landed. And so I conducted that investigation, which was an extensive investigation, which led into the Paul Bennewitz incident.
What was that? What actually happened?
Paul Bennewitz, or the?
Well, both.
Okay.
I've seen some of the documents about the Coyote Canyon event, and also earlier one, or around that time, where one of your security officers saw this.
Right.
Out on the.
Actually, one of the security officers from Sandia Laboratories, they had their own security, was checking. It was driving around on a graveyard shift sometime after 2 o'clock in the morning, and saw a craft land at a bunker. But the bunker didn't have anything in it, but the craft landed. And when it landed, all the electronics in the vehicle shut off. His engine shut off, his portable radio stopped transmitting, his portable radio in the vehicle stopped. For as long as that craft was on the ground. When the craft took off, everything came back on. And so I investigated that. All we found was that something was landed there.
It was off base radar.
No radar. I checked it. The first thing I did was check with FAA. And we had also at Kirtland, we had at that point, at that time, it was pretty a secretive unit that scanned every single frequency that could possibly be generated in and around the base, radio frequencies. And so I went to them and I said, hey, did you guys pick up any strange frequencies on this particular time frame? Nope. I said, okay, I went to FAA, let me see your printouts for this night. Nothing. So then I thought, well, are these guys making this up or what? Well, then the security police inside Manzano, I interviewed them separately and they told me the exact same story. So I thought, it just makes too much sense to be a fantasy or hoaxing. So we investigated, but we could never find anything regarding that craft. But shortly after that, Major Ernie Edwards, who was the commander of the 1608 Security Police Squadron, the Air Force Security Police that guarded Manzano, came to me and said, I got a phone call from a guy by the name of Paul Bennewitz. He lives right outside the base. He lives in Fort Hills, which is a housing community just on the other side of the base perimeter. And he told me he's seen all sorts of strange lights around Manzano. So I said, oh, that's strange. And so I started checking into it, and we found out that Paul Bennewitz owned a business right outside the main gate of Kirtland, Thunder Scientific Laboratories. They made humidity sensors for submarines. So he had a government contract, and he had security clearance. So I went and paid him a visit, asked him about what he saw, and he started telling me all sorts of stories about what he saw and what he did and what he thinks they are. So we conducted an investigation just to make sure this guy wasn't a Russian spy. He wasn't, doing all these things. His house was literally just a few feet from the base perimeter. I mean, his backyard bucked right up to the base perimeter, and he had all this sophisticated. Now he was a physicist. He had all this sophisticated equipment on his patio, his upper bedroom patio, that was pointed towards the base, and that's what we were concerned about. So we conducted an investigation on him, not only us, but National Security Agency, because he actually tapped in, and this was classified at one time, I don't believe it is classified anymore. He was tapped in to a National Security Agency, an NSA project that was going on base, and which he shouldn't have been able to figure it out, but he did. Very smart guy. So we had to figure out how we're going to get him away from what he was doing. And so we started slowly convincing him, or not really convincing him, but just giving him the idea that this might be just UFOs, extraterrestrials. And he ran with that. And I know I had a lot of criticism about that I fed him all this disinformation, and I made him go crazy. But Paul thought a lot of this up on his own. I didn't have to. It wasn't very difficult for me to convince him what he was seeing. He just told me it's UFOs. Years later, I became friends with him. Years later, after I got out, he still owned it. I tried to explain to him that what he saw wasn't, but he would never believe me. He eventually went crazy and he died some years later. But some of what he was seeing was he took pictures of strange-looking lights in orbs. And in fact, I sat, and not just me, Jerry Miller, who was he had been a Project Blue Book investigator some years before, and he was in the intelligence staff at Kirtland, not with OSI, but with another agency. Him and I sat in a room, probably not any bigger than this, with really tall ceilings. And Paul was sitting, and we just had dinner, and we came in, and we had some coffee, and the lights were down. In fact, none of the ceiling lights were on. We had just some table lights on. And we were talking. It was 8 or 9 o'clock at night, in a winter night. And he was explaining to us what he was seeing. All of a sudden, we see this orb up in the corner of his room. And I looked at it and I watched it. Nobody else saw it at first. And I kind of elbowed. There was 3 of us there. It was me, Jerry, and another agent by the name of Steve Atzett. And I hit, and Jerry looked up and he said, and we didn't say anything to Paul. And that started flying around the room, and then, of course, Paul saw it. He said, well, there it is. We looked around like, what the heck is this thing, you know? And so we watched it for maybe 20 seconds, and it disappeared. And went right back to that spot. Well, Jerry thought that it was created by Paul. And Jerry confronted him. He said, Paul, what did you just do? Paul said, no, I didn't do anything. He said, can I look and can I check things out? Yeah, go ahead. Well, Jerry's a scientist too. He looked all over, went up to his room, looked all, couldn't find anything that could have generated something like this. It was a ball of light with like little sparklers around it. And he says, that's the aliens. That's their reconnaissance. That's how they keep an eye on me. And a few weeks later, we were in his house without him being there. Now, a lot of people are saying we broke in, we surreptitious entry. He gave me the key. Paul gave me the key, told me to keep my eye on, if you ever want to go in there, here's the key. So we didn't get any search warrants or anything, but we went in there and we saw a real small orb, not the same size we saw, really real small orb that burned a hole through his ceiling. Through his wall, from one room to another. And when we came back a couple of weeks later, we told him about it, and that burn hole was still there. So at first, we thought Paul was just hallucinating, you know. But the more I looked into this, there was something to this. He was actually photographing extraterrestrials. Not so much of a creature or but of their reconnaissance or their small orbs that they used to conduct experiments on humans. And he had I don't remember how many, but he had a whole group of pictures that I told him, the next time you take any pictures with he had a Canon 35 millimeter, one of those, well, at that time it was new. He had a Canon 35 millimeter, and I told him, I said, if you ever take any pictures of UFOs, don't develop them, let us do it. And he said, okay. So he calls me one day, he says, got a whole roll of 32 or 30, whatever many's in one of those rolls of photographs of these UFOs that I took over at the base. So I went out, picked them up, took them over to our secure photo lab, gave them to our secure developer and said, hey, develop these. And I stayed there watching, waiting. I said, I wanted some 3x5s and 8x10s and whatever you can. So an hour later, however long it took, he comes out with them. He says, what the hell are these things? And they're oval-shaped crafts flying above planes that were landing at, now Kirtland Air Force Base shares a field with Albuquerque International Airport. So planes coming in, these things would fly right over top of them and then veer off.
Were these more like orbs, or were they structured?
No, they were structured. They were structured. And there were, I can't remember how many photographs there were, but there were structured crafts. And we had it blown up. I mean, the photo guys could do a lot. We had it blown up. I mean, whereby these crafts were about as big as the Corona craft. And they were exactly, oh, absolutely. Details, struts, the bottom of it. Well, there was one particular one, and these were color photographs, showing a blue trail coming out of the bottom of the craft, which is probably the energy device. And we sent them all up to headquarters, and I don't know whatever happened.
Were they seamless?
They were seamless, yeah, seamless. Yeah.
And did, whatever happened to these photos, or were there any videos, or was it all photographs?
No, all photographs. He never did any videos. No. Now, he didn't do a video, but we had a video that was brought to us at the base of this guy who lived in Placitas, north of Albuquerque, lived in the mountains. He was retired Air Force. I believe he was a pilot. And he had a video camera set up, and he was watching animals. He lived in a remote area. Deer and elk would come up to his back area. He was pretty much filming that. He was a wildlife amateur photographer. But one day, one night, he heard a noise, went out, and his craft hovering right over his backyard. And he took a video of that. It was about 28 seconds or something like that before the craft took off. And that is the only video of a legitimate video. We took the video of the camera and everything, because we always want to analyze all this stuff together. We sent it to headquarters. They sent him a check back to pay for that camera, because they were going to give him that camera back. And they were going to give him, and he wanted copies of that, but he never got that back. They classified it. Whatever happened to the stuff we sent up, I don't know.
Where did you send it to?
OSI headquarters.
Office of Special Investigation.
Yeah, Air Force Office of Special Investigation. At that time, it was at Bowling Air Force Base, headquarters at Bowling. We sent it to headquarters of IVOE, which is the counterintelligence location, and then they would send it over to NSA. And the only reason I know that was years later, after I retired, I joined a pretty closely knit group of former and retired intelligence officers. We get together every year. I haven't attended every single year, but out of 25 years, I probably attended 20 of these reunions or get-togethers. And normally, they're after or before the UFO convention at Laughlin. Well, it used to be at Laughlin, now it's in Arizona. And we'd sit down and talk. Just sit down and talk about, in a secure, kind of a semi-secure place, and talk about what we know. And that's why I learned a lot from them, because they were briefed in programs I wasn't briefed into. And one of the intelligence officers was from NSA. And when I first met him, in probably 94, 95, and I had never met him before, I didn't know him before, he said, I always wanted to meet you because you and I were on the same case together. I said, what case? He said, Paul Bennewitz. I said, what do you mean, Paul Bennewitz? He says, yeah, we interviewed him too. So they were investigating, and we were investigating, and we didn't know they were investigating. One particular night at Paul Bennewitz's house, it was rainy night, winter, kind of fall. I was there, and Jerry Miller was there, and Paul was showing us different things. And Paul came to me and he said, you see that house across the street? The front of this house. I said, yeah. He said, you see those lights in that upstairs window? I said, yeah. He said, they're not supposed to be there. I said, what do you mean? He said, the house is vacant. I said, I said, I wonder who's over there. So I got a gun, and so I go down and I snoop around, and I see the two vehicles parked hidden in the back yard. One's actually in a yard. So I get the license numbers off these vehicles. And the next night, I didn't want to go in. I figured, well, maybe they're buying behind the house or whatever. So the next day, I ran the plates, and they come back to a rental company out of Hertz, I think it was, out of Denver, and they were rented on a government credit card. So I thought, okay, now go ahead. I don't know, a week or 2 weeks later, we were there at the same time, and we see these lights. Well, these lights are, you can tell, camera lights, the old red lights coming on, seeing that there's cameras pointed over here. I said, I'm going to get this time. So I call Albuquerque police contacts I had, tell them what I had, and tell them somebody come over there. And they come over, and we confront these two guys, and they had to tell us they were special agents, and they rented this place. That's about all they said. So I knew.
They say what agency?
No, they didn't. And the APD was, I was off base. I didn't have much jurisdiction there, so Albuquerque Police Department had to, I was relying on them. They ID'd them. It was confirmed that they rented the place. So I was left at them. But this agent I met years later told me, he said, we investigated that one. We investigated the abduction up at Springer. I didn't know this. So NSA was intimately involved in this stuff too.
Do you know any other agencies or any of these other gentlemen you've met with?
DIA, of course, the CIA. We have quite a few members of our group from the CIA. They weren't. They didn't do any field work because the CIA couldn't do that. But they were relying on a lot of information that we were feeding them, and they were doing analytical studies of what they had, but the FBI, of course, was involved in it. Well, they found a box, a cylinder, I should say, not a box, a cylinder on the Eben craft that had been analyzed at various locations, and Sandia had it. And in 1984, President Reagan came to Sandia and was going to be specifically briefed on this. And I happened to be part of the security detail. And I was in the room when they was explaining this to him. And this cylinder and they had I don't know, electron microscope view of it, or however they figured out how to x-ray it or whatever they did to it. But they had cutouts of it and a presentation on an overhead projector. And they were explaining to the president what they thought these things did. And it was a multi-purpose avionics device that was also a navigation device for them. And so that's really the only technology that I've ever learned or heard that Sandia was involved in.
Do you know any further extent to which President Reagan was being read into these various projects or information?
I was told one of our members of our former intelligence group was a Secret Service agent. He was a Secret Service agent for some years, and then he went over to the CIA. And he told us that one of the most fascinating things about Reagan was he believed, and he was briefed. He didn't see it or know it, but he knew of others, Secret Service agents, that told him that when he took office on January, whenever it was, 20th, whenever, of 81, he immediately asked for a briefing. Before the Iran, we still had hostages in Iran. Before the Iranian, he even addressed that issue, he says, I want to be briefed on everything we have on UFOs. He sat in the Oval Office and said that. And they said, yes, Mr. President, we'll do that. So he knew, he was never there when he was briefed, but he knew of it. I went to Washington to get an award for something I did, which is still somewhat classified. And I met the president. I never talked to him about this subject. But he knew something because he said to me, I know you work on some very interesting things out there.
Hindsight's always 20/20. So if I had to do it over again, I would have requested some changes in the assignment and some different different strategy towards what our goal was, and how we wanted to go about that. But it wasn't as complex as some people read into it. Paul was a believer in UFOs, and Paul was a believer in what he was doing, and he was thoroughly convinced, without any of our urging, he was thoroughly convinced that what he obtained and the pictures that he took were of UFOs or ETs. So all I had to do was kind of urge him along to believing that, because what a few people know is that Paul had stumbled onto a classified project on Kirtland, and when Paul first came to us and told us he came to us as a concerned citizen, as a veteran. He was in the Navy, and he was concerned about what he was obtaining or what he was collecting through electronics means and the photographs he had taken. And he was concerned that there might be some threat against the Kirtland Air Force Base, and so that's why he came to us. And when we started investigating this, we found out that what Paul actually did was he tapped into a classified national security agency system that was located on the base.
And that was a communications channel, right?
Exactly. And so we didn't want him to think that he was that he had done that. So he was convinced that what he tapped into was an ET signal. So we just continued to urge him to think that it was a ET signal and not the actual NSA signal. Now, what's interesting is that some of the pictures that he took of objects flying around Kirtland, some of them could be explained, but some of them couldn't be. And back in the 80s, the early 80s, the Air Force was experimenting with drones, highly classified at the time, and they were flying drones, different types of drones, and I don't know exactly the types, but anyway, there were different types of drones. And some of the pictures that he took were of drones, and that's classified. So we never told him, they're drones, but we told him, wow, we don't know what they are. They're UFOs. They're unidentified flying objects.
This leads me to another important question about the whole Paul Bennewitz affair, and that's this. In reading everything about it, I always thought, here's a guy who has government contracts with the Air Force or the government, through his company, probably a somewhat patriotic guy. Like you said, he was a concerned citizen, came forward to say, hey, look, I'm seeing this stuff in restricted airspace. I took these pictures. Why the incredibly elaborate ruse and bringing in UFOs and extraterrestrials and Dulce base and all of this stuff? Why didn't the Air Force just take him into confidence, tell him the truth, and swear him to secrecy about what was really going on?
Well, that would be one of the things I would probably have changed, and I probably would have tried to convince my supervisors to do that. But when we found out that his company had a industrial security clearance, and that he had a secret clearance, his company did, he did, his employees did, with Thunder Scientific, because he made parts for submarines, nuclear submarines. I proposed that to my supervisor, and when one of the other supervisors from Washington sat down at a table to discuss the strategy on this, he vehemently said, no, we're not going to brief him into it. This is too highly classified, and he doesn't have a need to know that.
And again, one of my other questions was going to be, and I really didn't think anybody ever asked you this, that if it was an extraterrestrial spacecraft, what was Paul Bennewitz seeing? Was it just the drones that the government wanted so desperately to cover up at that time?
Some of them were drones. There were clearly some of the photographs that he took were of drones. They were recognized and identified as drones by other intelligence people. But some of the objects that he took photos of were not drones. In fact, he took a series of photographs on a particular rainy night, and there wasn't any drones flying during that time period. And these objects were large, they were saucer-shaped, and they were rather close to the base perimeter of Kirtland. And when we sent them to the headquarters to be evaluated or identified, they came back that these objects were not drones, and they were not anything identifiable to the Air Force or any other military agency. So we don't know what they were.
Wow. So you mentioned that your uncle was, had some relation to Holloman Air Force Base. Did you guys ever talk about the Holloman landings that are so famous in UFO mythology, or do you know anything about that? Is that a real story, or is that a hoax, or just mythology?
No, it was real. It was
Films of an object flying. One picture depicted an object that looked like it was flying out of the mountain, and it looked like some kind of saucer-shaped object. He immediately then thought that there were UFOs coming out of Manzano. The second film was of an object that was something experimental that the government was doing. When he filmed that, then again, the flag went up that he just filmed the classified project. Paul made a presentation to the Air Force officials on what he had been doing and about what he had been collecting. He showed some of his film. He showed some of his pictures. He had an audio recorder that was playing the sounds that he had collected from the base. The highest ranking person in the room, which was a brigadier general, said, "You have some very convincing information, Paul." And that kind of set everything in motion with Paul to let him think that, he does.
He was caught right in the middle of it. And then he was used. If it hadn't been for Paul Bennewitz, I would have never known 70% of the stuff that was going on.
What kind of stuff did you find that would make you think that there was something underground there?
Well, the entrance to
It was a big enough entrance to get a truck or a plane or something through?
yes.
You saw this? But it wasn't where Paul said it was.
No.
No?
Wrong information to Bennewitz. Were you able to witness that?
Bennewitz was very good to giving me information, and after we researched the area, it was true, but I don't know what Richard Doty was communicating with Paul Bennewitz. I know they were following him. Yeah.
That Doty was following Bennewitz?
Yeah, Air Force Intelligence. Yeah.
Yep. Because one of the things that Doty had said is that he was the one who told Bennewitz that there was a base under in the Dulce area, and had supposedly planted jeeps and stuff there to make it look like there was something there, to make him believe that.
No, because it is true, because we did find out what Bennewitz talked about. It's true, it's there. If he did it and somebody else, I don't know why he would do that, but for Bennewitz took me and showed me where the things are, that's true.
Paul is a pilot, and he had a plane, and he flew around those areas, and he saw things, and he filmed things up there that again presented a problem for us, because what he was filming up there was actually a secretive military installation that was training commandos. So then we had to convince Paul that what he was seeing up there was again UFOs.
The Air Force actually put him in a helicopter
with Rick Doty the first time and flew him up to a place above Dulce called the Archuleta Mesa. And before they took him up there, they dumped a bunch of props up there. They flew him up there, flew him over the mesa and said, "You're right, Paul, look, there's stuff here. You know, there's some evidence of what's going on. Why don't you check this out for us?"
So I would go with Paul up there, and we actually camped out there a couple times. And then we actually saw some things that startled me, which were fully explained later. But one of the things was kind of interest was lights coming out of the ground. But the way the lights, these beams were coming out of the ground in a pulse kind of manner, that it looked like there were saucers flying out of these mountains. And I actually saw this. And I was somewhat concerned that maybe Paul stumbled onto something.
So you hardly had to say anything, sort of a wink and a nod perhaps at the right moment, or sort of a confirming smile, or nothing more serious than that?
That's it. Initially, we had to do some other things eventually down the road, but initially...
Like what?
Eventually down the road, he claimed that there was a alien base at Archuleta Peak or Archuleta Mountain up near Dulce, New Mexico, in the northern portion of New Mexico.
Many people have thought that, yes.
Right. And so what we did, he kept going up there. He was a pilot. Paul was a pilot, and he would fly up there, and he would photograph things. And he was convinced that the things that he was photographing was actually an alien base.
Uh-huh.
So what we did was we went ahead and fortified his thought by putting a fence up there around some certain things, bringing in some helicopters from Fort Carson, Colorado Army helicopters, which, by the way, they were using that area as a training base also. I mean, it was a classified, at that time, it's not anymore, but at that time it was a classified training area for special operations missions. And they were up there, they were using that area. So there was already helicopters flying around up there.
Well, what'd you do? Paint them dark jet black or something?
We had a couple black helicopters, and we had some things planted onto the ground around Archuleta Peak, and just to convince him that what he was actually looking at, he thought it was an alien base.
So
we had to go through thousands and thousands, I mean literally thousands and thousands of right-pad drawings.
was he still active duty when he handed you these?
He's civil service.
Civil service, but still employed.
Right. Yeah, he had interest in it and finding out whether those bolts were really there or not. And so he did a lot of his own investigation, and plus we were working together, and he gave me a lot of those drawings, which I ran copies of them, scanned them in, and then destroyed the original copy. He wouldn't get in trouble.
But he did get in trouble. He got his clearance yanked, right?
Yeah, in 1998 he got his clearance pulled.
As a direct result of what he gave you?
Right. As soon as let me back up on that. As of 1996, he had his clearance pulled.
Okay.
It's because of when I first posted an error report on the bolts at Wright-Patterson, the Air Force just went ballistic.
Were you contacted?
No, but they had my phones tapped.
How did you? All right.
Nobody had physically ever come to see me.
Okay. How do you know your phones were tapped? A good tap is not detectable.
My good footy have the abilities and the equipment to test phone lines that can detect rust 2,000 miles away.
Okay. So you believe your phones were tapped, or they confirmed it for you?
Right.
And you did say you had thousands of hours of conversations on phone, right?
Well, with all the people I mentioned to you before, right? We had nonstop. Jamie, Bill. We had Kit Green, Al Putoff. Of course, John Alexander was out there somewhere on the left. He was never really that involved in it. And plus the people I just talked to you,
I know John Alexander very well.
Yeah, it's my right-hand person. And then we had not only thousands of hours of conversations, but we had these regular meetings up to about 1991, I believe.
Okay. what Air Force office does counter intel work?
That was Rick's old office, Air Force Office of Special Investigations, PJ. We call them the Pajama Gang affectionately.
Uh-huh.
And they're the ones that run all the counterintelligence. They protect all the black programs for the Air Force. They have an office right here at Wright-Patterson. They have an office there in the Pentagon. They might have an office at Kirtland, or maybe they used to, but I don't know if they still do.
Where are you actually located right now?
I'm in Dayton, Ohio.
Dayton, Ohio. Oh, so you're close.
Yeah, I guess you could say that.
Yeah.
Close to Nevada.
Do you think your phones are still tapped?
As of 2003, there were still phone taps on this phone line as of 2003. So we just assumed they're phone taps on them.
Mm-hmm. All right. When they yanked his clearance, they must have, pulled him in and somebody, and something happened, right?
Yes, but I didn't get those details. I know when I posted that preliminary Wright-Pat report back in '96, they sent him to Florida on a vacation for 2 weeks.
Uh-huh. Okay.
He doesn't tell me everything, but I learn enough things that you can get a good picture of what's going on.
Uh-huh. The Aeronautical Systems Center, ASC, at Wright-Pat, does what? They black programs, right?
Well, you've heard of Aurora, haven't you?
Of course.
Well, they manage the Aurora program out at Area 51.
Okay.
They manage the F-117 and the B-2 when it was hush-hush and in a black program.
All those now are pretty well known. One can only imagine, or perhaps you can tell us, Robert, what came after Aurora, what came after the B-2. In other words, those were the secret projects being managed. What are they managing now?
I don't know what if they have anything after the B-2. I don't know if it's 117, but we suspect, but we can't really prove at this point that they manage UFO programs.
You know anything about black triangles?
Yes. Oh, are they? Yeah, I know. Some people say they're ours, but I don't believe it.
Okay. Where exactly at Los Alamos are the UFO artifacts?
Well, TA-49 is was the original facility. That was called the Dulce complex in 1954. They converted an underground nuclear storage facility into what is now become the Dulce complex.
Right.
And then there's a few other locations, but we don't know a whole lot about them. And one of them is in TA. I can't remember that one. Was TA 40? But yeah, it was TA 40. TA 40 is now the alternate entryway into TA 49. Because in TA 49 they closed up back in around 2001 because of all the security leaks.
What was there that you know of?
You mean in TA 49?
Yes.
Well, I have never been in that facility, but Rick has, and I understand.
What does Rick say?
Well, it's pretty. They always use front organizations to hide what they're really trying to do in some places, and that's normally designated as a munitions testing area. But then in a certain building you walk into, and you go to a certain elevator, and this elevator was behind a vault door, and they'd have to open the vault door up before you could go in the elevator. And this elevator would be down around 5 stories or so, and it would open up on the bottom. And he said that the underground facility there, which we call the Dulce complex, was pretty.
And what did he see?
He said he just went into a room and escorted into a room and sat down on the back with a friend, and a lieutenant colonel or Fulbright colonel walked through. It was pretty so, and it would open up on the bottom. And he said the underground facility there, which we call the Dulce complex, was pretty.
And what did he see?
He said he just went into a room and escorted into a room and sat down on the back with a friend, and a lieutenant colonel or Fulbright colonel walked up to him, had him sign a special security clearance for the EB-2 interview.
For the EB-2 interview.
Right, which is in the book.
Extraterrestrial biological entity, right?
Right.
Continue.
So it's described.
Describe it here.
He said I'm trying to remember all the details of that. 4'3" alien walked in a tight-fitting jumpsuit, and there were 3 civilians there. I think there was a colonel. I think there was a colonel and 2 civilians there, sitting right there at the interview table. And he wasn't sure whether this EBE was either talking verbally or telepathically. He couldn't tell where the sound was coming from, but he could hear it, but he could also the EBE moving.
Okay, you believe him?
Yeah, I do, because everything else he's told me, it checks out. Right, Pat? Sure checked out.
Well, when you say right, Pat, checked out, what exactly do you mean? The documents that you got that got this guy's clearance pulled checked out, or
well,
you know more?
The documents show you where walls were put up, where stairwells were at, where elevators were at, where tunnel entries were at, where surveillance cameras were at, and
I mean, all of this could be true, Robert, but it could be for a national security purpose that either did or didn't have anything to do with ETs or ET artifacts or whatever.
Well, they certainly pulled this reason, I guess.
Well, anytime you disclose something that's national security, trust me, your security clearance is going to vaporize.
Well, we must have hit something, but
I'm sure you did.
It certainly was extensive, and the way this thing was blocked, and these entryways were blocked and concreted up, and walls were put up, and the people there would never know there was anything there. People today there work at Right Pat have no idea where any of this stuff would be.
Well, apparently longer there. Are you fairly sure of that it's all been cleared out?
You can never be 100% certain of anything, but we're pretty certain that all the hardware was moved out. There might be some documentation, which still is kept at used to be FTD, but we don't know that. We can't prove those kind of things.
Mm-hmm. Do you have first-hand knowledge of any of the things that we've talked about so far tonight? Because most of what you've told me has been, so-and-so told me, so-and-so told me.
Yeah, I've seen UFOs a number of times.
Okay. But, I mean, with respect to what you've told us about Dulce, about Right Pat, and we've sort of briefly touched on Area 51, we'll talk about S4.
Well, but I'm not a person who goes out to, who has seen things. What I do is collect information and put it together. We call it intelligence in the Air Force.
Sure.
And so I take all the source information, plus the things I learn on my own, and put it together, try to check what we've done, be able to do with other sources, with other facilities, and with other people, and put it together.
And so the conclusions you've come to are that they had these underground facilities that you've documented. You've got the drawings of them at Right Pat. They had
you believe, artifacts there, possibly bodies there. They were moved, you believe, to Dulce or Area 51. Is that correct?
Correct, as far as we know.